Good afternoon. I'm Richard Haglund from the Department of Physics and Astronomy, and I've had the good fortune to be a part of the Science and Religion project in the CSRC for the last 3 years now. Today's lecture is the second in a series. For those of you who were not here yesterday, Dan Sperber talked to us about the way in which stability in causal cultural change is created and maintained, we hope, for the good of the human community. Today's lecture on beliefs and values is a little different kind, I suspect. Now, not knowing the content of your talk in detail, I thought a bit about it and was reflecting a bit this morning on a statement that Hannah Arendt made half a century ago in her book called The Human Condition, in which she referred to what at the time apparently seemed to her to be some difficulties with scientific thinking of the day, by which she meant mostly quantum mechanics, which was the triumphant form of physics 50 years ago. And she commented that the scientific truths of quantum mechanics, to the extent that they could be spoken of at all, were only slightly more meaningful than the concept of a winged lion, and perhaps less so than that of a square circle. But she expressed the concern that perhaps because of their abstruseness, that it might be that knowledge and thought would have parted company for good, and that we would become, in her words, thoughtless creatures at the mercy of every gadget that is technologically possible, no matter how murderous it is. Those words sound prescient now, but in thinking about a book that was not mentioned yesterday, Explaining Culture, one of my favorite passages, and it has to do with this issue of how it is that scientific beliefs come to be accepted, and I suspect that there's something more generalizable about the comments that you made, but since I'm starting from science, I'll start with this. Speaking first of all about Gödel's celebrated proof in mathematics that basically you cannot beyond a certain level generalize the truths of mathematics. Let me just butcher the Gödel that much. And then he says, outside scholarly institutions, both the means and motivation to do that work of understanding are generally lacking. On the other hand, once the difficulties of communication are overcome, acceptance is no problem at all. To understand Gödel's proof is to believe it. Now, the human cognitive organization is such that we cannot understand such a belief and not hold it. That is, you can't understand it and not accept it or believe it. To some significant extent, and with obvious qualifications, this is the case with all successful theories in the modern natural sciences. Their cognitive robustness compensates, so to speak, for their abstruseness in explaining their cultural success. The fact that the successful scientific theories impose themselves on most of those who understand them is manifest to people who don't understand them. This leads quite rationally to laypersons believing that these theories are true and expressing as beliefs whatever they can quote or paraphrase from them. Thus, Gödel's proof and scientific theories generally become cultural beliefs of a different tenor, accepted on different grounds by the scientists themselves and the community at large. Now, it seems to me to be a very interesting analysis of a phenomenon that we all have observed, and in fact, it clearly applies also to many other professions, not just to the sciences. But I suspect the reason why we're willing to accept those truths and to believe them has a lot to do with values, which is the other half of the topic for today. And with that, I'd like to turn the time over to Dan.
Thank you.
So, here is microphone number 2. Oh, is that still on? No, that was off.
Thank you. I'm afraid the second lecture, which was to be on belief and values, is going to be on beliefs. Just because I was trying to think what can I cut it, because there was too much stuff in it. I ended up cutting the values. I hope it won't be valueless, nevertheless. And some of the values might creep in the lectures the lecture on Thursday. But you'll see that we have plenty of stuff to go through today, and that should keep us busy. Maybe since the second lecture, it can be a bit more informal, and I will gladly, unless the organizers say otherwise, take questions of clarification during the talk. I mean, if you have some subtle objection, keep it for the end, but clarification is welcome. There's one kind of attitude in the empirical study of religion that seems very commendable, and that could be described as methodological agnosticism. It consists basically in adopting the following stance. When you try to explain the cultural history of religious beliefs, or when you try to explain from an anthropological, historical, historian of ideas point of view religious beliefs, don't make any assumptions regarding their truth or falsity. And it sounds both open-minded and sensible. It's quite similar to an attitude that's been commended in the history, in the sociology of science by the so-called Edinburgh School of Barnes and Bloor and others, and what they call the symmetry thesis in sociology of science. So they argue that the same types of causes should explain both true and false beliefs, rational and irrational beliefs, and successful and failing beliefs or theories. So there shouldn't be, you should go about explaining all beliefs, whether true or false, in the same manner. At some level it has to be correct. But what does in the same manner mean? I think it means you want to explain them causally. And there's room for causal explanation of all beliefs, whether true or false. But does it really amount to saying that the facts of the matter that the beliefs are about somehow don't play a role in the causal explanation? And I want to suggest to you that it's a bit more complex, and that this position of methodological agnosticism may not be so easy to maintain. Well, of course, we want to keep the kind of open-mindedness and so on that characterizes it. So look at various beliefs. So for instance, most of us believe, everybody here believes that there are goats. And you're right, actually, there are goats. Few people in this room, I assume, I mean, I've not been to Tennessee very often, believe that there are ghosts, but some might. There are quarks. Well, I don't know how many of us understand what this means. I don't quite understand, but I believe it all the same. So it's a scientific belief, well respected, and so held by people who, as in the quote we just had, accepted on the authority of others, of scientists, physicists, some of whom are right here. And there are humors, and that's a discredited scientific theory. I mean, for a long time, lots of bodily function were explained in terms of theory of humors that date back to classical antiquity, and that was alive until the 19th century. But that's, so we believe that's false. There are no such things as humors, just as there is no phlogiston in physics and so on. But the fact that such beliefs are held, all of them, calls for an explanation. Of course, if you're a student of, if you're an anthropologist or a student of culture, typically you're more interested in the two first. There are goats, there are ghosts. In fact, in the second one, there are ghosts. Because there are goats somehow doesn't seem to deserve much attention. Why do people believe that there are goats? The answer seems to be they believe that there are goats because there are goats. Now, be careful. Now we're just moving away from methodological agnosticism. The existence of goats should not play any role if that position is a correct one. But the truth of the matter is that it seems to play a role. So we can actually classify these various beliefs in various ways. So there are the true beliefs, like there are goats and there are quarks, and the false beliefs by general consent. Again, not everybody may agree that there are ghosts or there are humors. The fact that there are ghosts seems to have been partly explained by the very existence of ghosts. The fact that the belief that there are quarks, the role of quarks in the belief seems less direct than the role of goats in the belief that there are goats. And of course, if indeed the belief that there are ghosts and that there are humans are false, neither ghosts nor humans can play a role in explaining that the existence and widespread character of these beliefs. Or you can also distinguish, classify them. There are two of them would be observable entities. I mean, goats are certainly considered observable, and people who believe that there are ghosts believe that ghosts can be seen, can be perceived, or can be heard. I mean, they make them, their presence impinges on the senses, as opposed to quarks and humans, which are not. They are theoretical entities. They are not directly observable. Their existence is inferred. Or you can also contrast among these beliefs the folk beliefs, like there are ghosts or there are goats. I mean, that's what, you don't have to be especially trained in order to hold these beliefs. Where there are quarks and there are humans are more historically belong to the scientific tradition. There are humans actually has also a folk version. And while the theory of humans has left physiology a long time ago, it's still part of folk view of human mind. There's a recent book by Noga Arika on the history of humans, which is quite interesting, actually, in this respect. Where and when, how do you go about explaining these different types of beliefs, scientific, folk, true, false, observable, not observable? And is the true-false distinction irrelevant to the explanation? Well, so let's use the little boxes and causal chains I was introducing yesterday. As usual, square boxes for events in the environment, round boxes for mental event representation, and so on. So basically, simplifying things greatly, a very important causal factor of our belief of the existence of ghosts is the presence of ghosts. I mean, we touch, hear, see, interact with ghosts, we even eat them. And that has a lot to do with our belief in the existence of ghosts. I mean, if you try to explain the belief in the existence of ghosts without taking advantage of saying I'm agnostic about whether there are ghosts or not, you would not be getting the best possible explanation, clearly. Of course, beware of the fact that it's not enough that there should be ghosts to bring about that a sentient being will believe in their existence. And not only they have to be perceived, but also you need to have conceptual resources to identify ghosts as such, and so on and so on. So it does raise interesting cognitive issues, our abilities to classify living kinds and identify goats, differentiate them from sheep, and so on and so on. So it's not a serious understanding of our beliefs about various living kinds. Calls for a lot of very serious empirical work, which a number of people have done, both in psychology and anthropology and so on, some of whom are in this room. But still, there's no mystery there, if you want. As opposed to, there are ghosts where, is there some kind of event in the environment which explains the recurrence of the belief in ghosts? And if there isn't, and of course, typically people who talk about ghosts will mention some experience. They may have had some sightings, some hearings, and so on. So there are typical noises and so on. But is that what causes the belief in ghosts, just as the interaction with goats causes the belief in goats? Dubious, and it'd be hard to maintain. That belief, the belief in the existence of ghosts, is really more puzzling. It's more of a challenge. But you see the point. I mean, if you accept this contrast between the belief in ghosts and that in ghosts, then in the way we go about explaining that we help ourselves to ghosts, to speak in one case, and we don't help ourselves to ghosts in the other, then you're not being agnosticist about it. I mean, you're not holding a position of methodological agnosticism, because you're taking the truth of our beliefs about goats, or in fact that they're essentially true, to be. It's not that the truth causes them to exist; it's that the existence of their truth makers, of the subject matter, of the goats, plays a crucial role in that. If we move to more scientific beliefs, like there are quarks. So you don't, the quarks don't impinge on our perceptual or sensory apparatus, and we don't see quarks, and we don't experience them, and so on. So basically, how do we come to believe that? Well, you know, some people who've discovered and understand what it's all about, they come to it from inference. That is, you know, again, round box mental states, or from some mental states with the question marks in it. So, because question marks, because it be, in fact, a complex mental states. They come to the belief that there are quarks. Is it Murray Gell-Mann? Who introduced quarks in physics? So who was the Murray Gell-Mann, yes. So Murray Gell-Mann was the first one who had some thoughts which led to the hypothesis that there are such things as quarks. For the rest of us, including students in physics and so on, you get it from a real world experience. There's a kind of event that causes you to believe that there are quarks, namely that you're told the production, again, different colors, because, you know, yellow thinks as a number of thoughts, yellow being in the upstairs, Murray Gell-Mann. Gell-Mann, how do you pronounce it?
That's right, Gell-Mann.
Gell-Mann, okay. I met him once, and he thought, because I was French, that I must be a postmodernist fellow, and I couldn't convince him otherwise. So, never mind. Maybe I mispronounced his name, and so that's what did it. Here, blue has some authority, acknowledged by yellow, says there are quarks. Probably makes a longer speech, explains this in some detail, and yellow comes to believe it. It's on the basis of authority. A lot of our beliefs are caused by events in the outside world, but these events are not the events the beliefs are about. They are these events in communication. I mean, if we move to humors, it's the same thing as it is with quarks. I mean, some thinkers, Aristotle and others, came to a conclusion that there are humors, and others accepted it on the authority of the then scientists, the scientists of the time. So, of course, this raises a question about quarks and humors. Isn't there somewhere down the line or up the line some relevance of the facts of the matter? And there is, but in a more complex manner. It's not like goats. I mean, it's not, you don't get direct perception. And I'll just mention how later on. So let's look again in more detail at a variety of ways in which beliefs forms and get transmitted and so on. So first you get kind of very basic perceptions like it's raining. So if it's rain, and there you get yellow, blue, and green who are forming the perceiving rain as such. I mean, rain is something that from a young age children categorize other animals. Probably make a difference between rain and not. I mean, they have a notion of rain, they have a category for rain, they discriminate rain as a distinct kind of situation. So you don't depend, you depend on communication in order to know how to call it, or maybe to have theory about rain, but to identify rain you don't. But of course, blue might want to communicate about, say, oh, what a rain. And yellow infers from it not that it's raining, because yellow already knew that it was raining, but that blue wants to chat, and then answers indeed. So now comes the so basically beliefs about rain don't need beliefs about the very existence of rain. To explain why we believe there's rain, you don't need communication to play an important role. Contrast with rainbow. So there's a rainbow, and both green and yellow, who have a concept of a rainbow, I've noticed it, and they paid attention, and they've categorized it properly as a rainbow. Blue, maybe a child who doesn't have a concept of a rainbow, wasn't even looking in that direction, and certainly didn't have any conceptualization of anything. But there, green is attracting blue's attention and says, see the rainbow. And now, blue pays attention. That is, sees the rainbow. So it's both influenced by the facts of the matter, by the rainbow, and by the utterance of green, and learns how to categorize, learns both to pay attention and how to categorize this particular event. As for yellow, she knew already that there was a rainbow, and if anything, this is just confirmation, but she probably doesn't need it. So here communication helps in categorizing and in drawing attention to things. When I was doing fieldwork in Ethiopia, among the Dorze in southern Ethiopia, one evening we had an eclipse of the moon. And so everybody went out when it started, and when they realized that it was beginning, they started making all the noise, banging pots and things, so making all the gourds and making all the noise they could, and shouting patsa, 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 which means heal. So they in the local conception, the moon is getting sick. I mean, what's happening when you get an eclipse of the moon is that it's kind of disease of the moon, and in order to help it get better, which it does, it always works. You make these noises and you express the wish that it should heal, and it does. So here, yellow and blue are knowledgeable, so they perceive a lunar eclipse and they know what to make of it. It's a sickness of the moon. Pink, on the other hand, is not. I'm always checking because typically the colors you get on the screen in front of you and those which are projected are not the same. So I've had some moments of confusion giving lectures and describing colors, and people didn't know who I was talking about. So pink, who again make pink a child, so she doesn't know much about that. But when yellow says the moon is sick, she will have an interpretation of what she's experiencing, of the event she's experiencing, and she was paying attention to it before because it was all this noise and so on and so on, but now she has a description for it, and Blue's description is getting confirmed. So when we get here, so we had from rain, which I take to be something which is kind of very basic experience of all, of many living creatures on the surface of the earth, to rainbow, which you have to pay attention to and categorize to a lunar eclipse, which is a rare kind of event. So in the kind of rainbow, you need attention and you need some way to categorize and to think about. A lunar eclipse is a very rare event, and which, if you want, also has the potential for an interpretation, for being interpreted beyond what you actually see, as was the case among the Dorze in southern Ethiopia. So various types of experiences call for more or less, give more or less opportunity for interpretation. And for interpretation, you depend more or less on communication from others. So a lot of cultural characterization will come through interpretation of actual events. Or take the white elephants. So in fact, has anybody ever seen a white elephant here? I haven't. But I Googled white elephants, and learned they were not really white. They're pinkish. In fact, I thought a pink elephant didn't exist and white elephant exists, but they're all around. And there are pink elephants. There are no white elephants, but the pink elephants are called white. And they play an important role. I mean, if you're a king in some Asian countries, you should have a white elephant, or at least a good thing to have. So Blue saw a white elephant. I mean, knew how to an elephant which was a pinkish elephant, and also very light gray elephants would be called white. Categorized it as a white elephant, and went around saying, "I've seen a white elephant," and so that gave reasons to yellow and to pink to think that there are white elephants, and yellow expressed it in his turn and said, "Oh, Blue has seen a white elephant," and that gives reason to orange and green to believe that and to repeat it and so on. So the point here is the belief in the existence of white elephants involved very few, unlike that of goats, involved very few sightings. I mean, lots of people believe there are white elephants, but very few people have seen them. But it doesn't matter. It's okay. It works. The information spreads in a fairly reliable manner. How much does it depend on there actually being white elephants? White being understood now technically as including pink and gray. I mean, if there were no such think, could you have a belief of the same kind of tenor spreading? Possibly, because it's you get, again, millions of people believe there are white elephants, and many fewer have seen them. So we have heard about them. So it's a belief that spreads through conversation, through communication. What about the ghost? I mean, is a ghost? Do you get the same kind of thing with a ghost and a white elephant? I mean, few people claim to have seen ghosts or to have died. It depends, maybe in some places many do. But basically, most people believe in ghosts because they've been told that some people have experienced ghosts. And you get the usual collapsing, so the chain may be long, but the people who tell the story don't say, I know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who's seen a ghost. They say, a friend of mine, a neighbor of mine, or the cousin of a neighbor of mine. So you collapse it, so it's always close enough, the actual perception of a ghost, so that gives you some authority in transmitting the knowledge. The point is, it doesn't matter if actually Blue has seen a ghost or not. If Blue has a kind of authority that's needed, and she says that she's seen a ghost, she will certainly contribute to the maintenance, to the stability of the belief that there are ghosts. It doesn't even matter if she's sincere or not. She may sincerely believe that she's seen a ghost. What she's seen is not a ghost, but she had some kind of experience which is so interpreted, and then she's contributing to the causal chains of culture, a mistaken perception. Or maybe she is not being even sincere, but she feels, why should other people have seen a ghost and not me? And so she volunteers that she's seen a ghost. And given that she's authoritative, that will also contribute. I mean, she's just following a cultural model and doing it, and it's fine. So the dependence for the spread of such a belief on actual experience is minimal. It doesn't really matter. I mean, so it's take another kind of case. Take a trance behavior. So green is in a trance. So that's something that's actually. I assume we all agree that there is such a thing as a trance behavior. It's a psychophysiological state. So green is in trance behavior. He's being observed by yellow, orange, and blue. Yellow and blue know what's happening. They describe it to themselves. They categorize it as trance behavior. Orange doesn't know what to do, but since yellow explains that green is in a trance, now orange believes also that he's in a trance. And blue's conviction is reinforced, and in fact it may also help her get into a trance state and undergo inside her trance experience and publicly a trance behavior, which now orange will be in a position to describe as she too is in a trance. We think of it in terms of a trance. So there you get something that's a matter of observation, and the existence of which, the recognition of which, and so on, is not particularly problematic. Now, in many societies, actually, the Doze in Ethiopia, among whom I worked, trance behavior typically goes with spirit possession. So it occurs in the context of spirit possession and not in our context. Or at least it occurs in our context, it's not recognized. So basically, take the same thing, replace trance by possession, but then it's what's the difference between the two cases? I mean, when you move from trance to possession, is what you get is much more interpretation. I mean, the trance behavior is now given an interpretation about the causes, the spirit, and so on that may have caused the behavior. And typically the behavior, if it's a possession behavior, which does, I mean, there are many ways of being in a trance, and it's something that is shaped by cultural input. So when people in a trance are possessed, they will display the typical behavior of possession. So in a sense, it's not the same behavior, trance behavior, that's explained just in a kind of plain ordinary matter, mundane matter as trance in one case and possession as the other. It's the behavior is a bit different itself. Its effect itself, it owes many of its properties to its interpretation, including of the interpretation of the people who are undergoing the trance. If you participate, as I've done, maybe some others have done too here, in a possession cult, there's a lot of evidence of possession actually taking place. There's a behavior that's very typical. It's really happening, and there's room for interpretation. But there are a lot of clues given by the behavior itself that favor interpretation in terms of possession. What I'm illustrating here is how various types of beliefs, some with a religious content tenor, others not, are likely to be fixed, to be transmitted and so on, by looking at, zooming on a very small fragment of the causal chains that distribute such beliefs in a society. No question of clarification so far? Okay. Yes, the problem is in the possession experience. When you're in the trance case, there is no question of the trance is not the perception, is not supposed to be guided by the perception of something else. It's an internal experience. Something's happening to you inside, and you're not assuming that something else is happening. What's special about possession is that the person possessed is supposed to experience something external to herself. She's experiencing some spirit or ancestors or whoever taking control of her voice, of her movements, and so on. But there again, I mean, it matters to the explanation whether there is some actual input. I mean, is there a goat involved there? Is there a spirit doing something? And if there is, then that's certainly you want it to be part of the explanation. And if there isn't, then no. Then it's a mistake. You can't really. I mean, it's not true that you can genuinely remain agnostic when you're trying to explain causally this thing, because the behavior itself and the way the interpretation that the people who participate have in it provide its own explanation. It presents itself with an explanation, or even the explanation is good, is sound, and it, as it is sound in my experience of my explanation of why I believe there are goats, and then there is no sense in not taking advantage of its soundness, or in not recognizing that the possession behavior is caused by the spirit who possesses the individual, or else it is not. And you need and you have an explanatory challenge that you didn't have in the first case. And the notion that you can suspend belief or disbelief on the matter and go about doing your explanatory job is a very nice and friendly notion. But in practice, that's not how it works. So you end up being a methodological atheist, rather than a methodological agnostic about these kind of things. Now, to reassure you, there are two kinds of people who are studying religion: those who are themselves believers and those who are not. So we have atheists, so they have no problem being a methodological atheist. Now, if you're a believer, basically, in the anthropological job, we're trying to explain thousands of religions. So you believe in one religion, and you basically believe that the others are false. So you're a disbeliever about all the others, and you find yourself in the same position, basically. I mean, you can be a methodological atheist about other religions. And strangely enough, I mean, some of my friends who are committed believers manage to be a methodological atheists about their own religion and studying it, and they are absolutely, so I don't know how they do it, but they do it. So there must be a way. Again, it's methodological atheism. It's not, but it matters. The point I'm trying to make is, in explaining beliefs, the facts of the matter of the beliefs matter especially when you're dealing with beliefs which are beliefs about things which are being directly experienced, which are not like quarks or humors, the result of complex inferences, then the facts of the matter are supposed to play a causal role in the beliefs themselves and therefore cannot be ignored. So in the same thing of visions, here he's blue saying, I saw Jesus. And what she says is believed by yellow, green, and pink. And again, we have the same question of whether, what kind of external event, if any, played a causal role in her forming, in having this experience internally. Was Jesus there to be seen? Or did she experience something that she could so interpret, but some event, external event, or was it all in her head, or whatever? Are questions that cannot be entirely ignored. But it's, in a way, that cannot be totally ignored if we're interested in her psychology. But if we're doing anthropology, or if we're trying to study religion, not at the population level, in a sense it doesn't really matter. Because what happens is that the belief that there are people who are seeing Jesus will spread anyhow. It indeed doesn't make much difference whether people actually see Jesus or don't see Jesus if they belong to a community where it is believed that it happens to some of the members of a community to see Jesus. It's enough that they should have some experience that they can themselves interpret as they're seeing Jesus, and that there should be a receptivity, a willingness to believe in the community to which they belong. So the facts of the matter don't matter to the spread, to the distribution of a belief. It's a kind of belief that somehow spreads fairly independently of the experience of the people who say that the causes of experience of the people who have the experience of seeing Jesus. So what I'm trying to get at, if you want to explain the beliefs, you want to explain, if you want to explain individual beliefs, the facts of the matter are quite important to the causal explanation. If you want to explain why a belief is widespread, when it's clearly widespread in large part because of communication, ask yourself whether it matters to the success of a belief at a social level, whether the people who present themselves as having a direct experience of a subject matter are right in believing that they've had that experience, in interpreting the experience in this manner. And in some cases it does, in some cases it doesn't. Essentially, it's the authority structure in these networks that accounts for the spread of these beliefs fairly independently of their truth or falsity. But again, it's not true of all. The point is that not all beliefs will be equally, will have a success that's equally independent on the facts of the matter. So the success of some beliefs depends very much on the facts of the matter, that of our beliefs doesn't, and in different degrees. Let me just to contrast with the case of scientific beliefs. Again, very simplified. Imagine in one slide, I'm not going to be very serious about it. But basically, Blue here is a scientist who is hesitating between two hypotheses to account for some phenomena herself. I mean, if she's hesitating between these two hypotheses, because there's a long history behind her of other people having thought about this same subject matter, and she designed some experiment A, which caused her to prefer hypothesis 2 and to advertise it on the ground of experimental results. And she does convince yellow that indeed hypothesis 2 is correct, and green eliminates hypothesis 1, but saying, oh, well, it's either 2 or maybe some new hypothesis 3, and does a new experiment there and so on. And the relationship here between the experiments and the beliefs it's an attempt to make your beliefs vulnerable to the facts of the matter. I mean, that's what you're after. It's difficult because there are facts of a matter which precisely are not given to direct perception, are not simple. They may not even be simple to understand. They're certainly not easy to ascertain, but they have some kind of consequences which may be testable. And what you're looking is for you're trying to design causal chains in which you're situating yourself, and hopefully behind you the community with whom you will communicate, designing situation where in this indirect manner the facts of the matter will impinge on the believability of your idea. So since it's a competitive game, alternative hypotheses are being pursued simultaneously, and the game is won first temporarily, but is won by precisely having succeeded in creating this kind of vulnerability to the facts of the matter and having in some sense survived it. So it's I'm not going to say more about that, but it's a very different dynamic. I'm not saying it's better or worse, and that's not my point. It's a very different dynamic of the spread and transformation of beliefs in the case of scientific beliefs than it is in the case of most cultural beliefs, in particular religious ones. Any questions so far? Yes.
It's an elegant, beautiful,
drop the compliments. Go to us.
And concise contrast with broadly religious beliefs and the scientific process. If I read it, that the boxes literally replace the assertions of, he said there, he believes in Jesus, or Jesus rose from the dead, is put in quote marks. It has a causal connection to other believers. If I read you, now it's a lovely idea. The experiment in the scientific discourse replaces those as causal agents. Is that fair?
Yeah, in a sense, first what I'm describing is what's happening among scientists in the know, because most scientific beliefs, I mean, as in the quote that Richard, we accept on authority and there is no big difference, okay. But yes, we're trying to give a causal, but you know, I mean, if you accept this idiom of cultural causal chains that I've been talking about, one of the ways in which we act and develop our knowledge and transmit is by putting ourselves, locating ourselves in causal chain, manipulating them, adding bits to them, and so on. So indeed, what is being attempted by this ideal scientist, I mean, the scientist's behavior is not always up to the ideal, is indeed to create an external event which will have the power, the causal power, to shift your thoughts one way or another and make them depend on that.
Well, to expand that to a grander, not grandiose, domain, isn't that also the role of the university?
Universities are very much in the transmission of knowledge. And so in the transmission of knowledge, authority plays a huge role, doesn't it?
Practically.
Yeah, well, you can't quite, the truth of the matter, there's no way to do quite without it. I mean, you can't. I mean, it's nice education goal. I mean, my kid is I have a 7-year-old is in a very progressive school, so they're trying to rediscover the world. Well, you know, yes, I'm all for it. But the truth of the matter is, you want to speed up matters, which when they're 7, it's okay, but when they're in university, you want them to pack a lot of knowledge very fast. And so authority plays a huge role in university. So I don't think. So the issue is how much critical spirit you want, inquiry you want to transmit in the university. But even if you do, it's not going to take the form of each student going to go painstakingly through all the arguments in favor of what he or she will end up accepting. It's just not accepting just bluntly the authority. And there's a risk of just a kind of general skepticism and relativism, which is not that smart either. Which is quite frequent in the student population. Yes?
You're saying how this is different from the spread of wouldn't the experiment be similar to the question marks in the religious continuation, such that like you have green doing experiment B, but then maybe yellow, now thinking hypothesis 2 is correct, interprets whatever results come from experiment B as being supportive of hypothesis 2, such that in the past someone who saw or heard someone say, I saw Jesus, then interprets something that they probably saw in the past, and then now says that's Jesus. So would that be similar to both sides?
I think that, it's an interesting point, but I think there are really very important differences which have to do, in fact, with the fact that in science, it's a neophiliac type of activity. New ideas are what we are after. I mean, if you do science, you want to come up with something new, and in order to manage to get it accepted, to get it published to begin with, you have partly to criticize others and to withstand their criticism. So you're dealing with a very tough game where all the focus is look at the weakness of the experiment, of the idea, of the interpretation, and so on all the time. In most cultural, let's not even talk about, think of political ideas, or think of groups of people who share ideas, belief, values. They can be religious groups, they can be political groups, and so on. They're not doing that. They're committed to ideas. And they welcome whatever will strengthen verbally their ability to convince others of the same ideas, and so on and so on. So they don't undergo this kind of, there is no questioning, there's no excitement in questioning the ideas you have. In fact, if you ever come to question them, or if people in your community start doing that, you feel that something is amiss. It's a threatening experience, whereas it's the most exciting thing that can happen to scientists. I'm not saying, again, it's an idealization. They may resist it. They may feel threatened. I mean, if new ideas win, then maybe my ideas are losing and so on. But it's the dynamic is very very different, I think. And so I don't think you could. I'm not against going for analogies, but I think I'm underscoring the differences. Yes, Albert.
Well, with respect to that dynamic, I mean, it makes a lot of sense when you think about something like I saw Jesus in the context that there's a whole community of people believing in Jesus. I haven't heard about this. But what makes it at the beginning, the very first person telling me, I saw Jesus, why do I not tell everyone else, he says he saw Jesus? Where there's no induction, because in I saw Jesus, there's a kind of an induction there, so Jesus exists, I saw white elephant.
Because you start as a child. It's not, it's what's true of culture in general is true largely, except of the movements of foundation and so on of religion. Culture doesn't begin, it continues. Religion continues. So there are changes, there are movements, there are movements of foundation. But in most cases, the experience is you start as a child with the modesty of a child, with accepting a lot on the grounds of authority, and you're right to do so. So it's there before you, so to speak. So what you'd have to challenge is not just one individual, but indeed a community and with. But let me yes, please.
Just ask you. Your diagrams begin with these boxes.
Yes.
Many beliefs would begin without the box, it would seem. If I'm thinking, for example, of there are terrorists who wish to blow up the United States.
Yes.
This may be ascribed to the existence of a box, an event that led people to believe it. May also be somebody who begins with that belief and then acts on that basis, and therefore the box may in fact not be present. Or if you took something that was even more irrational than that, but was uttered by somebody who has a lot of credibility, then you might in fact just begin with a circle, and there would be no box.
No, there'll be no. What you're saying, there will be no square box, right. The content of which justifies the belief, and that So what you get is only round boxes, indeed, and they are, and you're right. I mean, but that's so. I don't think there's a disagreement. And if
it would seem that you're closer to somebody like Gail Bourdieu, who talks not only about the power of the person who's speaking, but his credibility or her credibility, the way in which he or she speaks, the status that person holds in a particular institution, and so forth. All of which are not clearly accounted for here. So,
well, first, I think there I will be talking a bit more about that next time. But the difference between first, I have lots of points of agreement with Bourdieu, indeed. But the disagreement is, I think it's important, in fact, crucial. To go into, to zoom in. I mean, here I'm kind of to go into a psychology, which he thought was useless, basically. And I think he's missing a lot of, so even if you take having the authority, having the power, I think if you don't get the psychology of that, you're missing much explanatory power. One way of seeing what understanding what I'm saying is, on one hand, you could see that as a disagreement, and I'm not afraid of disagreement. And in fact, I didn't disagree very much with Bourdieu, but he disagreed very much with me. I mean, he really thought that what I was doing was wrong. I admire him very much, so there's an asymmetry there. So we can see that as a disagreement, or you can see that as my saying there are so many unanswered questions, or even questions which are not even asked in Bourdieu's description, and you want to tackle them, and that's what I'm trying to do.
You're trying to take a step back from Bourdieu and say what motivates the person to seek this power in the person.
Yes, and what are the cognitive capacity that makes us accept, the kind of, if you have beliefs which are based on no external event causing it in an appropriate manner, what kind of minds do we have that makes us susceptible to this kind of thoughts and to accept it from others and so on? So I want to understand that. I don't think it's it's an important question. Yes?
Slip in an additional question.
Yeah.
With perhaps another type of a religious assertion. How would you deal with the question or the statement, there is evil in the world?
Oh. Yes. Again, it's this is a case of a belief, the content of which doesn't pick one particular experience, but gives a way to interpret or contribute to interpretation of a great many experiences. So it can get reinforced by many actual experiences, which will be interpreted in its light and which will in turn confirm it. The questions have moved somewhat from clarification to substance, and since I already realized that I will have to cut about half of, not only did I cut the values out, but I'm going to cut many beliefs out, or many explanations of beliefs. Let me just, so anyhow, so you may have indeed chains of transmission. I mean, you could, here it starts with where you have something that believes that transmit just through being on authority. Somebody says that, somebody believes it, repeats it, and so on, just like a folk tale and whatever. But then it's a belief. So you can have that kind of. It's a kind of with no. The thing you are talking about. It's not hooked. It's not rooted. Sorry, it's not rooted in the facts of a matter of a belief. Not even under an interpretation. So you can get that. And if there is this possibility of this kind of epidemiology, then you'd think, oh well, anything goes. I mean, you can any belief of any tenor could spread, and that's not true. Not every possible belief has an equal chance of reaching a cultural level of distribution. Some other factor, that's it. You change computer and then I mean, I've put it's on the key and this computer and the E. It doesn't matter. You get anyhow. So does it matter? By experience, again, it's in a round box. I mean the experience as something being lived by the agent, by the person, as giving reasons to hold the belief. So some of his beliefs are reinforced, at least at some juncture in the causal chain, by some individuals having the experience of evil, the experience of being possessed, the experience of whatever. And maybe if there may be some external event which causes this experience, and in which case this experience, in a sense, is an interpretation of this external event. And again, the question comes: how much is it determined by, on the one hand, the event itself, which plays a causal role in its interpretation, and the cognitive, the psychological. Has that gone out? No, they don't do it. Maybe I've moved something, so that's okay. I've got two of these guys. No, I hate them. Yeah, and you sound like you. No, that's on. It's a plot. It's a plot. Okay. I probably said something I shouldn't have said. But thanks to technology, we'll go on. And so how much is the interpretation constrained by the facts of the matter, by the event that is being interpreted? How much it is constrained or held by the psychological disposition, which themselves are, of course, culturally informed to a huge degree, is an open question. And the question is of interest to me because of the role it plays in the stabilization of the beliefs. And again, these things can, they can be more or less frequent along the transmission chain. There may be very few people who have the experience of being possessed, or there may be a great many. And then the way in which the belief will spread will be quite different. In fact, I mean, I have experience of two possession cults in Ethiopia, where a lot of all the participants were getting possessed. And so they all had some experience that certainly confirmed them in the beliefs of a real thing. And the cult of El Nino Fidencio Espinazo in northern Mexico, where you have the only people who get possessed are the group leaders. And then the way in which they get possessed is quite different, and it has to do with this population phenomena. That is, it's much more spectacular, demonstrative, and contributes to their authority in a much greater manner, which compensates for the fact that few people experience it. Those who experience it experience it in a spectacular manner that is in a way more convincing than otherwise. So we can identify a number of factors, both perceptual, and there is some events in the outside world impinging on your senses and causing some cognitive process, experiential, which may be, again, something that happens inside you, which may be more or less caused by a perception or not, and determined by the content of a perception to a greater or lesser degree, and see how these factors, I mean, there are questions I'm raising, I'm not giving answers, how they constitute factors of stabilities along the causal chains of culture. So, for instance, the frequency of a reactivation of belief by the perception of similar public event, again, by public I just mean outside, in the environment. If you see a possession occurring regularly, even if it doesn't occur to you, the frequency of reactivation by a similar experience, are you yourself being experiencing trance and interpreting as possession? And if you have a similarity of experience, it's got to be partly in psychological, more specifically cognitive factors, a similarity of experience across individuals, and also with similar external input. So there are a number, again, if you want to explain the fact, which I insist on last time, the same belief will spread and remain stable, not simply decay, not vanish, or not get transformed beyond recognition, so that you get a certain continuity, cultural continuity or religious continuity in a community. The issue is particularly striking, is more striking for ghosts than it is for goats. Again, the belief in goats is recurrent, resilient, and so on, is not a mystery. The goats are there to make sure that we keep believing in them, so to speak. When it comes to ghosts, you want to ask, are there certain types of experiences that are likely to create ghost beliefs or ghost-like beliefs? I don't think so, by the way, but you might think yes. If you think of possession, the trance experience is more open, susceptible to an interpretation in terms of possession than anything is directly interpreted in terms of ghost beliefs. And other cognitive factors that will cause whatever experience to be interpreted in a recurrent manner and to be stable as such. So these are some of the questions I want to ask. And again, what happens in religion is that many belief contents are stabilized in the absence of perceptual or even experiential confirmation. I mean, I've mentioned a number of religious beliefs that typically at least have an experiential basis, but belief in the Holy Trinity, there is no perception and there is no experiential. I mean, it's not something you experience. Holy Trinity, nor is it something that you perceive. In fact, it's a mystery. You don't even understand it. But nevertheless, this is a belief that is widespread. Our beliefs may be a bit more closer to experiential things, the divine omnipresence, where God is everywhere. So maybe you can interpret aspects of your experience in such a manner, but it's not that you actually perceive it's anything or that. But you may, if you believe that God is everywhere, this may affect the way you experience things in a way which will somehow seem to confirm the idea. But the fact is that it's characteristic, and that's why religion poses a special and especially interesting problem in a general anthropological perspective, is because a number of beliefs are stabilized there, they are become important, major parts of culture, and either they don't have truth makers, or their truth makers, if there are any, don't play any role, or play only a very marginal role in this belief being held and spread. So of course then that means that a crucial factor for such beliefs is the acceptance of authority. It's an essential explanatory factor. Without that you wouldn't, I mean, these are beliefs, they are population scale phenomena. Religious beliefs are not something that occurs to an individual in isolation. You have them because you belong to a community. Even if you're a founder of a new church, you will be very steeped in experience in religious ideas, and so it will be a variation on a theme and not something that comes out of the blue. So the role of authority is absolutely crucial for these kind of beliefs. And notice, for belief in goats, it's not. Again, it's not that you learn nothing about goats from others, but belief in goats doesn't depend on authority. But again, if you just take authority as the explanation, there's no limit to what, if a belief which has no experiential or perceptual confirmation can spread because of authority, then you could just, we could invent belief contents in continuation for which there is no experiential or perceptual basis, and say, let's have it spread. Why doesn't that belief or a similar belief spread the way religious beliefs do? So not every belief, some contents seem to spread well on the basis of authority, and others are not doing as well as that. And now I'm going to skip lots of and come rapidly to a conclusion. But still, I mean, the point, so I'm not there there's a whole bunch, an whole packet of slides I will skip. But so variations, as I insisted last time, are the norm rather than the exception at the level of individual episodes of memory storage, retrieval, imitation, communication. It's not that we're not copying machine. I've not had time to insist on that, but in my work, we're not copying machine, and this raises fascinating problem for the study of culture. I mean, if we were a copying machine, the spread of culture, its stability, and so on wouldn't be that mysterious. But we're not, but by a very wide margin. We're not even an approximation of copying machines. So how come then that there is a relative stability at the macro level of a distribution of cultural representation, and in particular the religious beliefs we've been talking about today? So here's the whole part about mental models that I'm going to skip. You're a bit deprived of all this. Look, at least you can look at it. That's a religious mask. So I was talking about religion there too. That's not a religious mask. You know who it is? Who is this guy? No? No, it's not Houdini. No, it's not me. No, thank you. Charlie Chaplin, this guy. Okay, so one of the what I didn't tell you about is, I think I was going to the part I've skipped is about the organization of a human mind in specialized mechanisms or modules, and I think I wanted to argue that they're a factor of stabilization of content in a very interesting and important manner, and I've not had time to do that. And as I gave you my website last time, and if you haven't written down, you can just Skype me and you'll find it. There's much more on that there. But one factor that has been invoked, which again, one factor among many others, in order to explain why some beliefs spread better than others on the basis of authority when the facts of the matter don't play either a positive or negative role in their distribution. One view is that inputs that meet the input condition of our specialized cognitive ability or cognitive modules in most respects, but that violate some basic expectation based on these modules, are strong attention grabbers and material for endless interpretation, and ceteris paribus are more likely to stabilize. So we are ready, for instance, it's part of a child's readiness in developing a knowledge of the world to expect that there will be living kinds which are characterized by an underlying essence, which have typical behaviors, typical bodily features, and also typical limitation in the way they move about in time and space. And which typically belong to one species and only one species. So if you now present them, you can't do it with a real thing because the real thing doesn't exist, but with a representation, it can be in a narrative form or a mask or whatever, of a living creature which has all the features of an animal and actually a remarkable attention-grabbing animal, but which has some property that you don't expect of animal or animal of that kind. Like, for instance, it can talk or it can be in several places at the same time, or it can see the future or whatever. Then you have something that is both anchored into this cognitive disposition which draw our attention to a certain type of phenomena and which creates for this psychological disposition an object of special interest because it's unexpected at the same time in many ways. So it's highly expected in some respect, not in others. So I started that in this 1984 paper, which I mentioned last time, called Anthropology and Psychology Towards an Epidemiology of Representation, but I just insisted on the kind of counterintuitiveness as a source of factor of stabilization and spread of religious beliefs. And Pascal Boyer quite rightly pointed out that this, and has done much more work on that than I have, pointed out that the counterintuitiveness makes sense only if it's mostly intuitive. So most of what you understand of this supernatural being is highly intuitive. So you don't have to spell it out, but you get some character, and not too many, maybe just one, which is strikingly different. And then you have a splendid attention grabber and something you can think about and think with, and that ceteris paribus will help stabilized. And Scott Ayton with others like Arano Renzaya and so on has done experimental work that enriches our understanding of that aspect of things. Still, even that, so that kind of helps narrow down the kind of belief content that are likely to spread and be culturally successful as beliefs. But not everything that meets this kind of bill will do. So there's one form of a problem which was named by Scott Atran the Mickey Mouse problem. So Mickey Mouse is, here's an animal, but it speaks, and it has certain, on one hand it's a mouse, and so it has lots of property we expect of small animals, but it also has some very striking differences. So why don't we have a Mickey Mouse cult, and why don't we, why are Mickey Mouse ideas good for entertainment, but not so good for religion? First, I'm waiting for the day we'll discover that somewhere there's a Mickey Mouse cult. But waiting, in the meantime, there's a whole direction of research that I've not had time to talk about here, which in the causal chains I've described, and in the way they help stabilize beliefs, I've been looking at the causes of beliefs and the subject matter of beliefs. Now, beliefs are also consequences. They help you interpret other things. Like if you, for instance, you have a belief that there is evil, there's very little input that gives it to you directly, but it helps you interpret a lot of things where there is no immediate presence of evil. You wouldn't, if you didn't have a belief beforehand, you would not particularly be caused to form the belief that there is evil everywhere. But if you have that belief, then you use it as a way to interpret the situation. And if you find recurring situation where a belief is being activated because of its relevance, because it helps you interpret new situation, that will also be a factor of stabilization. So the activation of beliefs by the contribution to the explanation of recurrent relevant events such as misfortune, death, and so on is crucial in the explanation, in particular of religious belief, in a manner in which I've had no time to go into. Maybe I should have given more space to that, but I haven't. Anyhow, to conclude for today. So because of a relative immunity from external evidence, explaining the stability and specificity of religious beliefs must rely extensively on psychological factors. And that's where I differ from Bourdieu. But of course, these psychological factors are explanatory of religious belief only at the population scale. So you're not going to derive religion from psychology. I am not a psychological reductionist. In fact, I'm violently against psychological reductionism. I think it's mistaken. We're dealing with population scale phenomena. The psychological disposition that play a role in the causal explanation, for instance, of religious phenomena, play a role together with consideration of the ecology. And first, the population, by the ecology, I mean the wider situation in which the individual psychological processes occur. And to begin with, the individual psychological process of every individual take place in a population of conspecifics with whom this individual interacts. And that's fundamental, plus so many other ecological factors. I just mentioned the role of misfortune in the stability, or death and other misfortune in the stabilization of religious beliefs. Those religious beliefs that are somehow linked to misfortune by either helping explain it or helping derive moral consequences from misfortune. Tell the person who's been hit by misfortune where to go from then on, and so on. Those beliefs take advantage of a natural property of the world, of the recurrence of death, disease, disease of animals, drought, and so on, and are pegged on these natural events in a manner that gives them a new life in a very recurrent manner. So I have a general slogan: the epidemiological approach to culture is made of psychology plus ecology. By ecology, I mean again a very wide set of phenomena, and precisely because I think that the basis for an epidemiological approach is both ecological and psychological, that the notion of reducing it to the one or the other would be, I think, basically misguided. I hope to have suggested today some of the ways in which this kind of approach can apply to religion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there questions?
I hope so.
Would it be possible to offer an example of how your approach illuminates a question about religion, a specific religion?
So I should?
Could you offer an example which might explain how your approach illuminates a question about religion, a specific religion?
I hope so, but it's first, yes. Let me apologize for not having had a developed example. I was thinking of using work for my own fieldwork in Ethiopia, and then I realized it would take practically all my time just to explain the example. So it's the general problem if you have to explain general ideas in a relatively short time. Of how you go about doing that. But you help me by suggesting a type of question you have in mind and for which you would like a kind of that.
I'd have to leave that to you, and maybe it's an unfair question because of the time constraints. But a basic question like belief in souls, for example, how this might, which is a near universal, or a question about a specific religion. I really don't have anything in mind. How the Bible works.
That's a very good example. So you got it. We talked about it yesterday, and that's so indeed as one example of this kind of approach applied to an empirical. This book by Brian Malley, studying among fundamentalists how the Bible, in the physical sense, the book itself, the scripture, are being thought of and being used and take in ritual and thinking and so on, is an example of how an epidemiological approach can help, I hope, illuminate very concrete religious case. The problem of the belief in souls is a very wide one. I'm not sure I've got something which are that original to contribute to that. Let me make a promissory note, which for next lecture, Thursday, I will try to have a work-out example that's both reasonably compact and reasonably concrete to satisfy your demand. I can't really improvise here in a satisfactory manner. Yes?
In religious communities, then is the critical function suspended because of the need to believe?
Is there such a thing as a need to believe? I mean,
that's what I'm asking.
Yes, I don't like very much the notion of a need to believe.
In your last point, you sort of referred to religious belief as an explanation for why bad things happen.
No, it's not. Let me put it the other way around. Bad things happen, okay, and leave you. When they happen to every one of us, they leave you with you're at a loss in both what to do, what to think, and so on. So what happens is that in such cases, typically you can find in religious ideas, but also in our form. But religion typically provides you with ideas which guide, which tell you what to do, which give you help you interpret things, and so on. And I'm not saying that in that sense they fulfill a need or whatever. I'm saying they get reinforced, they get relaunched, they get this contributes to their stabilization. They get activated in that kind of context. Whether the issue of a need that religious idea would satisfy is there's something that I don't like about it, but it presupposes that there are a number of questions which religion comes and answer. But most of the questions that religion answer are asked within religion itself. So the questions, so even you think about questions about life and death. So you get views about the history of religion, of existence of religion. People have questions about life and death, and religion comes and answers. Well, are there questions about life and death before? I mean, is there a kind of an initial state where you have people having questions about life and death, and then religion comes as an answer? Or are the questions vivid precisely because they are being discussed, highlighted, interpreted in a religious context? So I've seen no evidence for the first alternative. So I don't think most of the questions that religion answer are posed within religion itself. But it's true that there are questions that are having to do not with life and death in general, but with your own personal misfortunes, for which one is at a loss, and one is looking for any elements of interpretation and also and so on. So indeed, you find lots of resources in this kind of context, typically in many religious ideas, beliefs, and practices, and that will just reinforce them. That's does that? You look dissatisfied, and that makes me sorry.
Well, I have a follow-up to that.
Okay.
There are many people who believe that religion, the issues of religion, can't be tested, can't be criticized in the scientific sense, and therefore that's another domain.
Yeah, that it cannot. Yeah. That, in a way, that's what I was saying too. I mean, the stability of his beliefs does not depend on the kind of critical approach to them. But that's so it's not that they've withstood criticism and gained some force from that, as is the case for scientific ideas, nor is it that they are based in an experience that, given our cognitive capacity, makes them mandatory, makes them, again, like goats. So we're left with the explanatory thesis. I mean, if many people believe that they're not usefully open to a certain kind of criticism, fine, that's probably true, but that makes it even more puzzling why they stabilize.
time has now come for us to dismiss to outside. I'd like to invite those of you who have additional questions to visit with Dan out there. And thank you all very much for coming. The next and final one of these lectures will occur